partnership with the Renewable Energy Policy Network for the 21st Century, REN21. Today's webinar is focused on from a renewable electricity transformation to a renewable energy system transformation, renewables in heating, cooling, and transport. Before we begin, I'll quickly go over some of the webinar features. For audio, you have two options. You may either listen through your computer or over the telephone. If you choose to listen through your computer, please select the mic and speakers option in the audio pane. Doing so will eliminate the possibility of feedback and echo. If you choose to dial in by phone, please select the telephone option, and a box on the right side will display the telephone number and audio pin you should use to dial in. If anyone's having any technical difficulties with the webinar, you may contact the GoToWebinars help desk at 888-259-3826 for assistance. If you'd like to ask a question, we ask that you use the question pane where you may type it in during the webinar. The audio recording and presentations will be posted to the Solution Center training page within a few days of the broadcast and will be added to the Solution Center YouTube channel, where you'll find other informative webinars as well as video interviews with thought leaders on clean energy policy topics. Finally, one important note of mention before we begin our presentation is that the Clean Energy Solutions Center does not endorse or recommend specific products or services. Information provided in these webinars is featured in the Solutions Center Resource Library as one of many best practice resources reviewed and selected by technical experts. Today's webinar agenda is centered around the presentations from our guest panelists, Hannah Murdock, Ute Collier, and Holger Dolkman, who have joined us to discuss a renewable electricity transformation to a renewable energy transformation, renewables in heating, cooling, and transport. Before we jump into the presentations, I'll provide a quick overview of the Clean Energy Solutions Center. Then following the panelists' presentations, we'll have a question and answer session where our panelists will address questions submitted by the audience. At the end of the webinar, you'll be automatically prompted to fill out a brief survey as well, so thank you in advance for taking a moment to respond. The Solutions Center was launched in 2011 under the Clean Energy Ministerial. The Clean Energy Ministerial is a high-level global forum to promote policies and programs that advance clean energy technology, to share lessons learned and best practices, and to encourage the transition to a global clean energy economy. 24 countries in the European Commissions are members, contributing to 90% of clean energy investment and responsible for 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions. This webinar is provided by the Clean Energy Solutions Center, which focuses on helping government policymakers design and adopt policies and programs that support the deployment of clean energy technologies. This is accomplished through the support in crafting and implementing policies relating to energy access, no-cost expert policy assistance, and peer-to-peer learning and training tools such as this webinar. The Clean Energy Solutions Center is co-sponsored by the governments of Australia, Sweden, and the United States, with in-kind support of the government of Chile. The Solutions Center provides several clean energy policy programs and services, including a team of over 60 global experts that can provide remote and in-person technical assistance to governments and government-supported institutions, no-cost virtual webinar trainings on a variety of clean energy topics, partnership building with development agencies and regional and global organizations to deliver support, and an online library containing over 5,500 clean energy policy-related publications, tools, videos, and other resources. Our primary audience is made up of energy policymakers and analysts from governments and technical organizations in all countries, but we also strive to engage with private sector, NGOs, and civil society. The Solutions Center is an international initiative that works with more than 35 international partners across its suite of different programs. Several of the partners are listed above and include research organizations like IRENA and IEA, and programs like FE for All, and regional focus entities such as ECOWAS, Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. A marquee feature of the Solutions Center provides is a no-cost expert policy assistance known as Ask an Expert. The Ask an Expert service matches policymakers with more than 60 global experts selected as authoritative leaders on specific clean energy finance and policy topics. For example, in the area of energy access, we are very pleased to have Alexander Oach, CEO of SD Strategies, serving as one of our experts. If you have a need for policy assistance in energy access or any other clean energy sector, we encourage you to use this valuable service. Again, this assistance is provided free of charge. If you have a question for our experts, please submit it through our simple online form at cleanenergysolutions.org/expert. We also invite you to spread the word about this service to those in your networks and organizations. Now I'd like to provide some brief introductions for our expert panelists today. First up is Hannah E. Murdock, who is a project manager and analyst at REN21, where she coordinates the Renewables Global Status Report, REN21's flagship report published annually since 2005. Following Hannah, we'll hear from Dr. Uptake Collier, who is a senior program leader in the Renewable Energy Division of International Energy Agency, IEA. She leads IEA's work on renewable heat and on renewable energy policies. And our final speaker today is Holger Dockman, who is the Interim Secretary General for the Partnership on Sustainability, Low Carbon Transport. Holger has over 20 years of experience working in the field of transport, city sustainability, and climate change. And with those very brief introductions, I'd like to welcome Hannah to the webinar.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you also to the Clean Energy Solutions Center, as well as my fellow panelists, Uta and Holger. As mentioned, I am Hannah Murdock. I'm the project manager for the Global Status Report at REN21 and also Analyst. And I'm going to go briefly through some of the main findings from our most recently launched Global Status Report, which was released earlier this month.
Hannah, I'm so sorry to interrupt. We can see the presenter mode and not the slideshow mode right now on your screen.
Okay. I'll try to start it again.
I think what we'll do is we'll take it back really quickly and then pass it back to you. And if you just want to show your second monitor, that will fix the problem.
Sure.
So you'll see the pop-up on your screen once again. And if you just want to select your monitor 2, there, it looks wonderful. Thank you so much. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, great. Thank you. Apologies also from my side. Just some background on REN21 first. We're the global renewable energy multi-stakeholder network that's connecting a wide range of key actors. Our goal is to facilitate knowledge exchange, policy development, and joint action towards a rapid global transition to renewable energy. REN21 is bringing together governments, NGOs, research and academic institutions, international organizations, and industry to learn from one another and build on successes that advance renewable energy. And the REN21 network is supported by a lean secretariat based at the United Nations Environment in Paris, France. The REN21 Renewables Global Status Report provides an annual look at the advances in renewable energy markets, policy frameworks, and industries globally. And the production of the report builds on a multi-stakeholder community of over 900 experts who have helped REN21 produce what is today one of the most widely referenced reports in the sector. This year's GSR 2018 marks 13 years of REN21 reporting and includes thousands of data points and documents along with personal communication from experts who are located around the world to provide the most up-to-date information available. So now jumping right into the findings of the report, 2017 was another record-breaking year for renewable energy, with total global renewable capacity up almost 9% compared to 2016 to approximately 2,195 gigawatts at year's end. This development was mainly driven by solar PV and wind, with PV representing more than 55% of newly installed renewable power capacity in 2017, followed by wind at 29%. This development is also reflected in global investment figures. Global new investment in renewable power and fuels, not including large hydropower, was close to $280 billion in 2017, as estimated by BNEF. This represents a 2% increase in investment compared to 2016, which means that although renewable costs keep coming down, particularly for solar PV and wind, investment in renewable power and fuels is actually increasing. Developing and emerging countries also widened their lead compared to investment in developed countries. But also to keep in mind when looking at this that these estimates don't include investment in renewable heating and cooling technologies for which data are not collected comprehensively globally. The IEA reported that global investment in solar thermal heating technologies increased steadily until 2013, but then fell each year through 2016. Renewable power technologies continue to attract far more investment dollars than did fossil fuel or nuclear power generating plants. An estimated $310 billion was committed to constructing new renewable power plants in 2017, and this compares to approximately $103 billion committed to fossil fuel-fired generating capacity and $42 billion for nuclear power capacity. So overall, renewable energy accounted for about 68% of the total amount committed to new power generating capacity in 2017. And although the share of renewable energy in total final energy consumption remains low, it keeps rising, with modern renewables representing 10.4% in 2016, which is 0.2% more than in 2015. Mostly due to the impressive growth in solar PV and wind. We'll see, though, however, that the developments differ significantly between the sectors. As renewables uptake has mainly been driven by solar PV and wind, the uptake is mainly happening in the power sector. And taken together, renewables accounted for an estimated 70% of net additions to global power generation capacity in 2017 and provided 26.5% of global electricity demand. Again, much of this progress is due to falling costs of solar PV and wind, which is made possible by technological innovations and changes in markets, effective policies, and new business models. But it's safe to say that the global energy transition is well underway in the power sector, which shows that it is indeed possible. Renewable power generating capacity saw its largest annual increase ever in 2017, with an estimated 178 gigawatts installed worldwide, raising the total capacity by almost 9% over 2016. Solar PV installations led the way, nearly doubled those of wind power, which was in second place, and adding more net capacity than coal, natural gas, and nuclear power combined in 2017. Total renewable power capacity more than doubled in the decade 2007 to 2017, and the capacity of non-hydro renewables increased more than sixfold. At least 98 gigawatts of solar PV capacity was added worldwide, which is the equivalent to the installation of more than 40,000 solar panels every hour. And the total global capacity by the end of the year reached at least 402 gigawatts, which was a 33% increase from the previous year. In wind, 52 gigawatts of capacity was added in 2017, which increased the global total by about 11% to some 539 gigawatts. So the good news in the power sector is, with solar PV and wind rising, many countries show that high shares of variable renewable energy can and are being successfully integrated into electricity systems across the globe without affecting grid stability. And penetration reached significant levels in many regions in 2017, with the leaders being Denmark at 52.9%, Uruguay, Germany, and Ireland. Looking now at the other sectors, the share of modern renewable energy in heating and cooling reached 8.4%, and modest improvements were achieved throughout the year, but renewable heating and cooling remains constrained by low fossil fuel prices and a lack of policy support. In 2017, the vast majority of renewable heat continued to be supplied by biomass, with smaller contributions from solar thermal and geothermal energy. I'll look at technologies, but just keep in mind that you'll be able to find a lot more detail when you are actually looking into our reports at REN21.net. For CSP, 100 megawatts of capacity came online in 2017, bringing global capacity to around 4.9 gigawatts. And several projects that were due to enter operation during the year were delayed until 2018 or later. But there's a pipeline of about 2 gigawatts of projects that were under construction around the world, particularly in China and the MENA region. Globally, 35 gigawatts thermal of capacity of glazed and underwater heating collectors was newly commissioned in 2017. The total global capacity was an estimated 472 gigawatt thermal by the end of the year. And gross additions for the year were down 3% from 36.2 gigawatts thermal in 2016. Looking now at transport, in 2017, global biofuels production, which closely tracks demand, increased around 3% compared to 2016, reaching 143 billion liters. Biofuels production and use are very concentrated geographically, with more than 80% of production taking place in the US, Brazil, and the EU combined. And the total renewable energy share in transport was only 3.1%, with liquid biofuels making up the vast majority of the renewable energy share in the sector. However, electrification continues to expand and is representing great opportunities to integrate renewables in the sector, in particular in rail and road. It also offers the opportunities to facilitate the integration of variable renewable energy. Electric passenger vehicles on the road passed the 3 million mark in 2017, even though annual sales are still only a very small proportion of the global market, about 1%. But further policy support for renewable energy in the transport sector is needed to build on these existing synergies. So the power sector on its own will not deliver the emissions reductions necessary under the Paris Climate Agreement or the aspirations of the Sustainable Development Goal 7 to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. The heating and cooling and transport sectors, which together account for about 80% of global total final energy demand, are lagging far behind. They also account for the majority of energy-related CO2 emissions. Looking at a further breakdown of this figure, you can see that renewable electricity is starting to play a role in heat and transport, but this is still quite small. Traditional biomass continues to make up almost 2/3 of renewable energy and heat. So if we're serious about climate goals, we need to speed up renewable energy and power, but also in heating and cooling and transport. Policy support and targets are essential to make this happen. By the end of 2017, at least 179 countries had implemented renewable energy targets at the national or state provincial level, up from 176 the year before. 48 countries had renewable heating and cooling targets, while 42 only had transport targets, and 146 countries had renewable power targets. Also, typically in the power sector, these targets are more ambitious. You can see in the chart that they're reaching 100%. And at the same time, 87 countries had economy-wide renewable energy targets. In terms of 100% renewable energy targets, there are now 57 countries with 100% renewable electricity targets. However, the number of countries with 100% targets for the other two sectors falls to 1. Policy support for renewable energy in 2017, as in past years, also focused mostly on power generation, whereas support for the other two sectors continued to develop at a slower pace. As of the end of the year, a total of 151 countries had implemented renewable energy policies of some kind, including regulatory policies, fiscal incentives, or public financing. And looking at the breakdown by sector, 128 countries had regulatory policies for the power sector. This falls to 70 countries when you look at transport, and 24 countries with heating and cooling regulatory policies. Carbon pricing policies were in place in 64 jurisdictions worldwide in 2017, either carbon taxes or emissions trading systems. If well designed, carbon pricing policies may incentivize the deployment of renewable energy technologies by increasing the comparative cost of higher emission fuels and technologies by including at least some externalities. However, there's still some uncertainty as to whether these mechanisms are sufficient to drive the deployment of renewable energy, particularly in the power sector. Although numerous measures have been adopted in recent years to scale up the use of electric vehicles, few efforts have been made to directly link renewable electricity production and EV use, or to ensure that EVs work to support the integration of renewable energy into energy supplies. There are limited examples of policies that encourage or mandate the use of both renewable energy, renewable electricity, and EVs. However, countries with targets for both EVs and renewable energy and power may encourage the use of renewable deployment for transport, and governments are also supporting EVs through public procurement. Another big trend is increasing corporate procurement of renewables. As of end 2017, corporations had actively sourced 465 terawatt hours of renewable electricity across 75 countries. The IT sector purchased the largest amounts of renewable energy through wind power and solar PV PPAs. Companies are also increasingly investing in renewables for heating and cooling and transport. When looking at the global energy transition, it's also important to look at the regional differences. For example, trends in renewable energy investment varied a lot by region. In 2017, China, Europe, and the United States accounted for nearly 75% of the global investment in renewable power and fuel. However, on a per GDP basis, many developing countries are investing as much as or more than some developed and emerging countries. Top countries in 2017 for overall investment were developed and emerging countries, with China, US, Japan, India, and Germany in the lead, while developing countries took the top spots for investment per GDP. This is particularly important in the context of the SDGs, especially SDG 7.1 on reaching universal energy access. Approximately 1.06 billion people, which is about 14% of the global population, lived without electricity in 2016, though this was about 125 million fewer people than in 2014. Also, 2.8 billion people live without access to clean cooking facilities, which is 38% of the global population and about 50% of the population in developing countries. The vast majority of people without access to electricity and clean cooking are in sub-Saharan Africa and the Asia-Pacific region, and most of them live in rural areas. But renewable energy offers many opportunities to tackle this challenge, and the markets for distributed renewable systems are thriving. So all in all, renewables are increasing in all sectors, but the uptake needs to be accelerated and scaled up, particularly in transport and heating and cooling, especially in view of climate and development goals. The overall share of renewable energy in total final energy consumption has increased only modestly in recent history. A primary reason for this is the persistently strong growth in overall energy demand as a result of economic development of emerging markets as well as population growth. Energy-related CO2 emissions also rose by an estimated 1.4% for the first time in 4 years. There's uneven progress between the sectors and between the different geographical regions, and a fundamental disconnect between commitments and real action on the ground. So simply put, the global renewable energy transition is progressing, but still far too slowly. So what do 2017 developments teach us? That renewable energy power developments show that a transition is possible, which is good news, but we need to move from a renewable electricity transition to a renewable energy transition. This requires a more integrated systems approach and creating more of a level playing field by, for example, removing fossil fuel subsidies, which are still 2 to 5 times higher than support for renewables, and thinking about activities at the local level and in developing countries. We need to make sure that all trends are visible, because a lot is happening, but the data is not consolidated. That means renewables at the subnational level, distributed off-grid renewables, innovative business models, and so on. So with that, I will invite you to join the REN21 network. You can subscribe to our newsletter to get regular updates about renewable energy developments globally, and download free of charge all REN21 reports, including the most recent global status report from 2018. We also have data packs available, all infographics and videos. It's all online at ren21.net. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hannah, for that REN21 introduction to the report. And we would like to welcome our next expert to the webinar, and that's Ute Collier. Dr. Collier?
Right. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. My screen is showing, yes?
Yes, it looks great, and you sound great as well.
Excellent. Great. Okay. As Katie has said, I'm from the International Energy Agency. I think most of you probably know who we are, but just briefly, we're an international organization based in Paris, where we have 30 member states, but another 8 associated as well. And we really cover all the world's big, almost all the world's big energy consumers, and we work with all these countries. So what I want to do is really pick up from Hannah's presentation, the issue that heating and cooling are incredibly important, yet they're lagging behind. So just briefly to talk about what some of the issues are and how some countries have managed to make more progress than others. So to start with, oops, I'm just trying to get these to move. So around half of energy is consumed as heat. You'll notice that our figures are just a little bit different from Hannah's. That is just to do with the way we treat statistics. This is final consumption, so it includes some non-energy use, but you know, broad ballpark figures is around 50%. And yet, you know, everyone talks about electricity, gets excited by electricity, but once you strip out the electricity that's used for heat, which is actually quite a lot, you know, in the US, in parts of Europe, we heat with electricity in some countries. The rest of electricity is only 15%. So, you know, you could really argue that policymakers' focus on electricity is somewhat misplaced. Notwithstanding now, of course, from a CO2 perspective, it is important, but clearly heat is something that needs much more attention. Cooling as well, you saw that I mentioned cooling in my first slide. Well, at the moment, cooling accounts for only 2% of energy consumption. It is growing fast, however, so it's not something we ignore, but there is a reason why at the moment we need to focus somewhat more on heating. And then Hannah already mentioned this as well. Obviously, most heat is being produced by fossil fuels. There's the issue of traditional use of biomass, and the modern renewables, well, roughly around 10%. I mean, we've got 9% here because of our slightly different accounting. But the most important thing, most of it is fossil fuels, or it's electricity produced by fossil fuels. And that then means that heat is actually quite an important contributor to energy-related CO2 emissions, so almost 40%. So you want to achieve your climate targets, you better think about heat. But also this has enormous benefits. So for example, in China, a lot of the urban air pollution is actually created by coal boilers, which burn coal to put into the district heating. And in fact, the Chinese are starting to address that. And energy security benefits also very important because, you know, most countries depend on fossil fuel imports. So in many countries, it's gas that's being used for heat. And, you know, there have been many disputes around gas imports. We have recently published some data on tracking energy against sustainable development targets, which you can find on our website. It's called Tracking Clean Energy, and it's a tool which looks at a whole range of different sectors and subsectors. So, you know, anything from electricity to buildings, whatever. But we have looked specifically at renewable heat, where we've taken one of our scenarios in the World Energy Outlook and looked at, you know, what to achieve to be on the trajectory towards the climate targets and sustainable development targets. Where do we have to be in 2030, and where are we now? So, you know, you can see that we've got a long, long way to go. And you know, we make assumptions here on which technologies. So still a lot from biomass, but we in particular need to ramp up solar thermal heat and also renewable electricity that's used for heating. So this is quite a challenge. And obviously, as we already said, we're lagging behind in almost every country. So what is it that's so difficult about renewable heat? In fact, there are actually multiple barriers, and I'm only going to list a few. If you're more interested, I've got some, I'll show you some publications we've produced recently which give you much more detail on those barriers. So in many cases, we are talking about higher capital costs. In fact, that's something we have in common with renewable electricity as well. And of course, in some of these cases, you've got high capital costs, but you've got very low running costs. So, you know, solar water heating, you don't need to put in a fuel. And markets don't deal very well with that. Consumers don't deal very well with that. In some cases, the overall costs are also higher than the equivalent, which is maybe a gas boiler. But one of the problems, of course, is that we've got low fossil fuel prices. Now, they do vary from country to country. Some countries actually tax gas quite a lot. I'm speaking to you from Stockholm. Sweden has had energy and carbon taxes for a long time. And actually here, hardly anyone uses gas for heating because it's simply too expensive. So people have either connected to district heating, which is mainly run on biomass, I'll show you later, or use heat pumps. But then there are many other countries, you know, in the United Kingdom or the United States. A lot of gas-producing countries like Russia have very low gas prices, and it's very difficult for anything to compete with gas heating. There are some suitability issues. So there are a number of different renewables, solar thermal, geothermal, biomass. Okay, you wouldn't be able to put in a biomass boiler in a city centre apartment. You have issues of access to bring the pellets or other fuels. There may be some limits in terms of air pollution. In industry, there are lots of different temperature requirements, and especially that very high temperature, say in the steel industry, it's quite difficult to meet with biomass, especially sustainably. At the same time, you know, that there are plenty of industrial processes where you can use renewables, and indeed they're already used widely, and in some cases very, very cost effectively, especially where you have waste products like, for example, in the wood industry, where you have wood chip which you can then use to produce heat. Generally, there is also a lack of awareness. You know, people have been using fossil fuels for a long time, and especially as it's often end consumers who have to make choices, they may not even know that alternatives exist, and the installers don't necessarily promote it either. In fact, in some countries, there's a total lack of supply chain. So, you know, you may think you want a heat pump, but you wouldn't be able to source it anywhere. And finally, just a general issue of consumer inertia. So you only generally buy a new boiler, say, if your household, or when your old boiler breaks down or is very close to breaking down. Well, actually, that's also a time where, you know, it's a bit of a distressed purchase, and then you just go and buy whatever your installer advises, which is generally a gas boiler. So these are some of the barriers, and, you know, to overcome them, you do need policy. As we've seen in Hannah's presentation, policies are not as common for heat as they are for electricity. And you do need different approaches in different countries. You know, electricity is electricity wherever you are generally, but, you know, here you have countries with different infrastructures, with different heat needs, etc. So when we recently worked together with REN21 and IRENA, and we produced a report on renewable energy policies, we broke down the heat challenge into 4 different clusters, where we looked at, you know, different country contexts which you commonly find, and where people can deal differently with heat, or apply different heat policy measures. So one cluster we looked at was countries that already have a lot of district heating, again, like here in Sweden, other Scandinavian countries, or obviously countries like Iceland, which managed to exploit geothermal. So the policies applied there tend to be very different. They often also have very long-term commitments, because it takes a long time to build up this infrastructure. But once you have it, it's absolutely excellent, because, you know, it's flexible. So in this, once you have the infrastructure, you can, you know, you may have started it on gas CHP, combined heat and power boilers, but these days you may have some geothermal, like in this picture from Paris, where you drill down into the aquifer and pull up hot water. You may use some biomass, and you may use waste heat. Lots of innovative ideas using waste heat from things like the metro or data centers, etc. Then we have countries like the United States, like the Netherlands, like the UK, for example, where there is very little district heating, and natural gas is very widespread. And then cluster 3, industrial heat and hot water, very different things. You know, you might not think India needs a lot of heat, but actually it does in industry and for hot water. And then finally, clean cooking. And all of these will require different approaches. And what works in one country doesn't necessarily work in another country, but some lessons can be learned and things can get adapted. So just to briefly give you a few points from Sweden, for example. So Sweden has seen this amazing transformation from using lots of fossil fuels, coal, peat, and oil, in its district heating system in the 1990s, and now you will find made bioenergy, where they obviously have a good resource, municipal solid waste, and then a number of other fuels, also things like solar heat being input now. And what are the key success factors? Well, to start with, they've had a very long-term commitment to heat and building up the district heating system. So this goes back to the 1970s, and it was very much an energy security issue because they've had to import all these fuels. Next, sorry, ambitious targets they've set over time, which are very important because you need to know where you're going. This is not clicking, sorry. Public investment, because, you know, if you're building big infrastructure, it's often very difficult to rely just on the private sector. So it was often local authorities involved. High energy efficiency standards, because it's very important to have efficient buildings as well. Obviously, a good biomass resource. So Sweden is, I mean, apart from Iceland, which obviously has fantastic geothermal, so it's almost 100% renewable, Sweden is probably the country with the highest percentage of renewables. But then looking beyond space heating at countries where the issue is more about hot water, especially as people get richer, they actually want the comfort of hot water. I mean, obviously, originally you wouldn't have had much hot water in some hot countries, but you do get more and more now. And many countries around the world have had successful solar water heating policies over many years. It was actually Israel which pioneered this in the 1980s with building code mandates of basically saying, well, if you build something new, it has to be with solar water heating. And they've spread over time, and now you find them in many countries, often done at city level, so in some European countries, but also I think somewhere in the US, I think it might be San Francisco has them. You find them in some Chinese cities. In fact, China is the world leader in solar water heating, and in Brazil. And it's been very successful, but we do now see a global market that is declining because electricity seems to take over in some of these countries. Renewable heating industry, there is really great potential. I already mentioned that. And some countries have been very successful at using that. But this is, if you think heat is already the Cinderella of renewable energy policy, within heat, industry is actually the area where you find the fewest policies. So we see some countries like France, which have specific instruments for promoting renewable heating in industry that have been very successful. In some countries, there's sort of similar to feed-in tariffs for industry, but it's still a sector where much more needs to be done. So, you know, countries really should think about how to promote renewable heat, not just in buildings, but also in industry. So to conclude, yeah, it is a bit of a Cinderella in energy policy. Actually, it's very hard to get policymakers excited about heat. They like electricity, I think. Then you can go and open a big power station where heat, a lot of it is very decentralized. It's about consumer choices. It's far too complex. So something where there is not a lot of awareness. In terms of markets, if you can even call it markets, it's all very complex. It's very fragmented. There are a few large manufacturers of, say, solar thermal, but not in the same way as in the power sector. The solutions are often local, so that's why it's really important to have local authorities involved, which is something a lot of countries have done, that have been successful. And then to go forward, I think target setting is really important. Hannah has shown, you know, this is an area where there are a lot fewer targets, but targets often focused mind. And we've seen that in the European Union, since there have been targets for, well, overall energy consumption, which you can only achieve if you look at the heat sector. Then countries are forced to develop strategies for decarbonization. So we need to see many more targets, and then obviously countries need to implement strategies. And then really, really importantly, this has to be linked with energy efficiency. Finding the resources for renewable heat can be tricky, and you do not want to burn biomass unsustainably, for example, but you're likely to do it if you use it in inefficient appliances in an inefficient building stock. So there needs to be a parallel effort to promote energy efficiency. And then sector coupling is actually quite important to think about what role heat can play maybe to help with variable renewable power generation. Thermal storage is much, much cheaper than batteries, which everyone talks about. So some thoughts here. It's quite a complex area. So for more information, just a quick link to some recent reports. So at the IEA, we produced a paper on renewable heat policies earlier this year. Then the report I already mentioned, IRENA, us and REN21, and also on the future of cooling that has just been published in the last month or so. So please go and find this report you find on the website of the 3 organizations and the other 2 on the IEA website. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that great presentation. Our next, as we bring our next guest to the webinar, I'd like just to remind our audience to please submit questions at any time. And our final presentation today will be by Holger Dockman. Holger?
Yeah, good afternoon, and many thanks first also to REN21 for inviting me, and first also congratulations to Hanno and the team for an excellent report. Also thanks to the Clean Energy Centers for facilitating that. So big thanks to Katie. So I work for the Sustainable Low Carbon Transport Partnership, which is similar to REN21, a multi-stakeholder partnership, which really also raises the issue of transport, particularly on the global agenda, and here with more than 90 members around the world, from banks to UN organization to large research organization, and very pleased to be here. We heard earlier from Hanno the importance of sector coupling, and I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into that also during my presentation. So first of all, we heard also from Hanno how important also transport is when it comes also to the need also for the energy transition, as well as particularly on tackling and meeting also the Paris Agreement. And you find here also on this slide a summary of the scenarios based also on an IPCC paper submitted also by Slocat recently, and you find here also the links, because I obviously can't get too much into detail. But bottom line is in 2010 we were around 7 gigatons. Now we're talking 2016 about 8 gigatons out of the transport sector. And all scenarios around the world, from the International Energy Agency to the International Transport Forum, as it shows in a business as usual scenario, a massive increase, particularly as a source of motorization also in the emerging economies and lower income countries. With that, at the same time, noticing, like also in the UNEP Bridging the Gap report, if we not substantially also go, if we want to achieve also the Paris Agreement under 2 degrees or towards this 1.5 degrees, we're talking about halving to actually bring it down to a quarter of the emission in transport to even have a chance to really meet the 2050 targets. However, even in a conservative scenario, which already assume a large amount of renewable energy, would still get us just with a slight increase. So we really need a full integrated approach on transport to really tackle transport and enable also to achieve Paris, and I will share a little bit more on that a little bit later. Coming also to transport and renewable energy, and Hannah already described that, and you here reminding us on the numbers providing through the GSR report that 30% out of the energy consumption currently comes from transport, but only 3% currently out of this is renewable, and out of that is even further down, is 0.3% is out of renewable electricity, while biofuels at least have 2.8% of that share. So in other words, transport is still heavily depending on fossil fuels, and only a successful energy transition can come through a transport decarbonization at the same time. So these two goes certainly as a hand in hand, and we have a long way to go. Here again, referring to GSR, but the International Energy Global EV Outlook 2018. We're currently talking about 3 million electric passenger vehicles on the road, which represents currently is only just 0.3% of the global vehicle fleet. We have even a worse situation in the freight sector, where almost electric vehicles are almost non-existent, even there's some promises along the road over the next decade, but still there's so very early stages. In the bus sector, it's interesting also to see that we have an enormous increase in uptake also on electric vehicle buses, particularly in China, which has 98% of the market. In cities like Shenzhen, you suddenly also have the whole bus fleet is electric. So we'll see on the passenger side an increase, but also particularly on the bus sector, while freight is still behind. And the other element Hannah mentioned earlier, that we only have a really few countries, and namely also Austria and Germany, also have policies also take up renewable energies in EVs, which is absolutely crucial also to enable Paris and enable really also a paradigm shift here. And another element we heard a lot about is obviously policy, and you see here a brief overview that countries starting also to set targets and policy frameworks towards also phasing out fossil fuel cars. In the leadership here, certainly Norway, who want to only allow zero-emission light vehicles, city buses and light commercial vans after 2025. So in other words, really also setting also these boundaries, and we see also the highest uptake also per capita in terms of electric vehicles is in fact also Norway. You see others, particularly here in Europe, following like the Netherlands, Ireland, Scotland, the UK, and France, while we see also California, recently also Governor Brown announced also the state bill to ban fossil fuel cars by 2014. Nevertheless, we need far more ambitious activities also to really also enable also that change. It's a slow progress on biofuels. You see here on that map, particularly Brazil and India with the highest ethanol blend mandate, and we'll see also the challenge and describe really nicely also in the GSR report about the challenges we have with also certain biofuels, particularly so competing also with the agriculture. So here's the overall potential without also not having strict recognition of the SDGs is important. The other element, and here you see also a quite complex table to collect the current activities in the G20 around also transport policies and energy policies, provided also by Agora Verkehrswende and GSZ on a report, which again also you find is under that link, shows in fact that we have on the energy and transport side, certainly there's a wide range of policy instruments. However, it's currently absolutely lacking in terms of the link between transport and energy policies also at the same time, as also mentioned before. That report also will be renewed also this year, and REN21 is one of the partners. We talked about Paris. One of the key pillars of the Paris Agreement is obviously also the bottom-up approach, and with the commitment from countries also to reporters on and submitters their action plans, the so-called national determined contributions. The analysis both look at shows in fact currently all the submitters, 75% of the submitted plans are actually highlighting also transport as a mitigation source. So that's certainly a positive. Referring also to Usha saying, well, we also need also sectoral action. Nevertheless, only a few NDCs and have in fact also currently a mitigation target. So we lacking really on clarity on responsibility of the sector. And you see on the right the analysis only about 25 of the countries actually have any kind of biofuel policy as part of their climate action plan, and it looks slightly better on the e-mobility. But overall, and that's also the second message here, if we don't also tackle also transport in a more holistically way, in other words, there's what we call this avoid, shift, improve, so that we need also to avoid future too much motorized transport, and so better integration of land use, reducing also the length of trips and allowing us a better access, shifting us towards more environmental friendly transport modes like walking, cycling, public transport, shared modes, as well as also improve also the efficiency of all current modes at the same time. We need us to do all of this above to really get us to the targets also I showed earlier. So, but particularly so on the ideas on avoiding and shifting, we don't see too much. So here, to really achieve Paris, we need to raise our ambition. So with that also, closing with some key messages, and we heard that we need far more attention to heating and cooling as well as to transport. We need also further to step up. We need also comprehensive action, and particularly in terms of energy, without the coupling of renewable energy and transport decarbonization and transition, we will not also achieve Paris, but also we at the same time should pay attention when we talk about energy in the transport context, how we can also reduce energy consumption, as I described in the avoid, shift, improve approach, as well as increases our energy efficiency. So here, really appreciate also the opportunity also put that also into an energy context, because I think these to communities, policymakers, stakeholders need to work far closer together, and particularly on the energy and common transport transition. So would like to thank for your attention. You will find all the information also on the SLOCAT website, where you also find more information is about the organizations and our partners. And with that, like to again also thank for the opportunity and give back also to Hannah. Thank you.
Wonderful, Holger. Thank you so much. Thank you to each of the panelists for those presentations. As we shift to the question and answer, I would like to remind our attendees to please submit questions using the question pane at any time. We also keep several links up on the screen throughout for quick reference that point to where we find information about upcoming and previously held webinars and how to take advantage of our Ask an Expert program. Our first question today goes to Holger. What can REN21 contribute to the much needed paradigm shift in transport?
Thank you also for raising also the question and giving me the opportunity to speak again. First of all, I think it's fantastic also to have REN21 as a multi-stakeholder organization to come up also with this report, sharing also this knowledge. In terms of transport, acknowledging also that transport is a key part of that, and putting more so the finger in the round to really say, well, we need also to bring also energy and transport closer together. I would love to also see even further tracking, particularly on those related policies, and also coming up with more initiatives around how we can also further scale that. So I think transport and energy also needs to also work far closer together, and REN21 is already a great job by raising that. And obviously also for me also the in-kind invitation is to speak, but that can be only the beginning. We need far more so good practice, national policies around transport and energy. We need also the international awareness, and we also need also that reporting and tracking even further down the line to also really also make the strong case.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Holger. Our next question, and let me also say if any of the panelists also want to comment on any questions, feel free to. Our next question is directed towards Hannah. Hannah, what is carbon pricing?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with some briefly saying that we haven't always tracked carbon pricing, but in the global status report, but just started including that beginning in the 2017 edition. So now you'll be able to find maps showing the carbon pricing initiatives worldwide in the latest two editions of the global status report. Carbon pricing is basically putting a price on CO2 emissions. It's the price paid to be able to emit a ton of CO2, and it's applied to carbon pollution in an attempt to encourage reduction in emissions. Usually this can be in a carbon tax or in purchasing permits to emit. And perhaps the most well-known example of this is the EU, the European Union's emissions trading scheme. But also China just launched a scheme of their own. So now the EU scheme is covering 1.7 billion tons of CO2. In comparison, China's is now covering 3 billion tons. And together, as of early 2018, between 20% and 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions were covered by an explicit carbon price. Those two plus the others that are existing worldwide. And this is up from 13% just the year before, with the increase mainly due to the entry into force of China's scheme. But the reason that this is important is because carbon pricing can, as I mentioned before, incentivize the deployment of renewable energy by increasing the comparative cost of higher emission fuels and technologies through the inclusion of at least some externalities like this, the pollution that I mentioned before. Perhaps the other panelists could talk more about the impact that it might have on the heating and cooling and transport sectors. I guess Holger or Ute, feel free to comment.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, I mentioned Sweden, and you know, carbon pricing has been absolutely essential to drive the switch to renewable heat there, because we just need to do. Low fossil fuel prices are a real obstacle, but the one thing countries really have to consider, because obviously heat is essential if you're talking space heating in cold countries. You need to think about affordability, because there are countries where there is a real problem where people cannot afford to heat it, and especially older people on low incomes. So you need to think about other measures if you introduce carbon pricing to make renewable heat more attractive. At the same time, also thinking about fuel poverty issues.
Wonderful. Thank you both for answering that. Our next question is for Holger. Holger, what renewable technology is going to prevail in the transport sector and why? Are biofuels sustainable on a large scale?
So thanks also for raising us the question. First of all, I think I described also the urgency of actions and the uptakers of renewables also in the transport sector very soon. So in that respect, I see currently also the main energies on the market is also the renewables and electricity. So electric vehicles are, the prices are also enormously going down, the capacities of the batteries are going up, and countries are also investing also in the infrastructure. So on a relatively short notice, it is actually possible, so like we have seen in Norway, but also seeing us in other countries with efforts also from the government and the private sector. So together, we will see also particularly as an uptake on electric vehicle. But again, also the challenge here is really about also the provision also of renewable energy at the same time, and that is we have to work really on the country policies. In the medium term, hydrogen might or might not also play also a larger role. It's one of the questions also for governments in terms of will also providers or a second infrastructure at the same time, and will I invest in that? But that also is something also certainly upcoming. The challenge we will see in terms of transport is particular when it comes also to the shipping and aviation industry. Even as we have some very small scale experiments in the aviation sector around electricity, and that is the opportunity for renewables. But that's in fact also where we might see also particularly also the opportunity also for biofuels coming also to the second part is of the question. Biofuel on that scale, according also to IEA, which would really also need for an energy and transport transition, will be not available also on a sustainable level. But particularly also the users in partially also freight and partially particularly also aviation industry is also an opportunity also to get towards also decarbonization.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question is for Ute. Most renewable heat is produced from biomass. Isn't that worse than natural gas in terms of air pollution? And how can you ensure that biomass sourced is sustainable?
Okay, thank you for that question. Yes, that's right. As I showed, at the moment, biomass really is most of renewable heat, although we see over time a slight shift and certainly more renewable electricity and solar thermal become important. Okay, so shall I start with air pollution then? I think I mentioned, you know, if you burn biomass inefficiently, you will have an air pollution problem. And in fact, we see that in quite a few places, in rural areas, in urban areas. The worst is if you have an open fire and, you know, you just put everything up the chimney, and it's not great. People think an open fire is a fantastic thing to have, you know, comfort, etc. But we are actually creating more problems. However, if you have very efficient modern biomass stoves, or you burn biomass in efficient modern combined heat and power plants, you can actually control the emissions very well. Of course, it makes it somewhat more expensive, but you absolutely have to, otherwise there's very little point. And you know that we have an air pollution problem in many cities, so we need to be very careful. And I already mentioned, you know, individual biomass boilers are really not the answer in city centres, but a combined heat and power plant with all the pollution control equipment on the edge of the city may well be. So we have to consider these issues. Then in terms of sustainability, again, there are many examples where things have gone wrong like this. I mean, not just in terms of the unsustainable biomass used for cooking, but also, you know, in other parts of the world where people have basically forced deforestation to keep themselves warm. And again, using the biomass, the wood, in a very inefficient way through open fires or very inefficient stoves. So the efficiency of the equipment is really important, and that, you know, I know there are parts of the world where that is a real issue, because, you know, someone who lives in a village in Georgia, in the Caucasus, cannot afford a modern, you know, say Austrian biomass boiler. So issues need to be addressed of building these locally and getting the costs down. But also, in terms of the larger scale application, you need to have a sustainable sourcing. And this is being addressed, for example, in the EU now, where it was just initially about the power sector and sourcing of biomass, but that's now also being applied to the heat sector. And actually, in many cases, the biomass used is very local, and it's actually very efficient types of biomass. So, for example, most cities actually have a lot of arboricultural waste from the parks, which you can chip or pellet, wood industries, etc., etc. So there are many examples of how you can do it sustainably, but I think governments need to absolutely tackle the sustainability and air pollution aspects as part of any renewable heat policy.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And Holger Dahlman had to drop off, so we are going to finish the question and answer discussion with both Hannah and Ute. Hannah, the next question is for you. During your presentation, you mentioned REN21's network of experts contributing to the global status report. What are the criteria for participating, and how can someone get involved in the next edition?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. As I mentioned, the REN21 network is a multi-stakeholder network, and it's actually made up of close to 20,000 people that are working on various energy issues: renewable energy, energy efficiency, energy access, and climate more generally. And those contributing specifically to the Global Status Report each year are closer to about 2,400 of those experts actually actively participated in the 2018 edition of the GSR. So we welcome participation by any interested stakeholders, be it as a data contributor, peer reviewer, or expert interviewee. Our contributors are ranging from university students all the way to the highest levels of leadership and in international organizations and multinational companies. So we're always open to participation from new people. And if you're interested in participating, I would just encourage everyone to get in touch with us either through our website or feel free to email us at gsr@ren21.net.
Thank you so much for that information. Our next question could be for both of you. The EU has agreed to a new 2030 target for heating and cooling. Do you think this is effective in driving deployment?
Okay, I'll take that. So, yeah, the EU last week actually agreed to a broader renewables target of 32% for 2030, and then within that there is a specific target for countries having to increase the percentage share of heating and cooling by 1.3% per year. Is it going to be effective? Well, I'd like to think it will be, with a couple of issues, of course. So, I mean, generally, the fact that the EU has set itself renewable energy target has been incredibly important for driving renewables deployment. But to 2020, actually, these targets were obligatory on each member state, binding on each member state. Unfortunately, to 2030, they're doing things differently. So there is an overall EU renewable energy target, and then member states have to submit their plans, and it's all supposed to add up to things. And then specifically for the heating and cooling, again, this 1.3% is non-binding. So it's a bit difficult to predict whether member states will stick to it. However, you know, within that, there is a very good process of having to submit plans, and they have to submit plans that cover energy efficiency and renewables and climate change action together, which is actually a very good thing. And I'm just hoping that the fact that this target exists will focus minds, because it's the first time we've had an actual heating and cooling target. And you know, many member states, even though things are not necessarily binding, they still feel an obligation to at least try and work towards it. So anyway, watch this space. Let's be optimistic here.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question is directed to Hannah. Are there any good examples of policies integrating EVs and renewable energy?
Yes, and I guess Holger kind of addressed some of this already during his presentation, but I'll reiterate that there are limited examples at the national level, at least, of policies that are directly linking electric vehicles and renewable energy. Holger mentioned that Austria and Germany are the two examples, currently the only two countries in the world that have it at the national level. Austria is offering a purchase price premium for EVs that are charged with 100% renewable electricity. And in 2017, Germany established a 300 million euro tendering program, providing grants for the deployment of EV charging infrastructure that sources electricity from renewables. But that being said, this is just at the national level. There are certainly more local and subnational level policies. And but that data is not yet consolidated, at least as far as we've seen. And as I mentioned during my presentation, there are at least there's some overlap in targets for electric vehicles at the national or subnational or city level. That many jurisdictions have both renewable electricity and electric vehicle targets, but this is still a very small amount worldwide. You can find the actual list of countries and other jurisdictions in the full report online.
Thank you so much. And I think we just have time for one more question each in the final minutes that we have. Ute, is there a scope for cost reductions in renewable heat technologies similar to what's happening in solar PV?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Renewable heat is slightly more complex in that, I mean, depending on what you're talking about, sometimes the installation costs can be very high because, you might need to put in a new heating system or have things like backup, solar water heating, for example. You tend to have an electricity or gas backup. However, and also some of the technologies are already very established, like biomass boiler. But at the IEA, we have technology collaboration programs for various technologies. And I'm actually here in Stockholm at the meeting of our solar heating and cooling program. And they've done some very interesting work looking at what opportunities there are for reducing costs of solar water heating systems. And there are a number of different options. I mean, some of it is about materials, like using polymers, which they're never used to using them. Some of is about using these technologies at scale. So in fact, we're seeing more and more use in district heating schemes, which is very different to putting things on just one roof. There's possibilities of standardizing systems more, because at the moment there are lots of different systems, whereas PV panels are fairly similar. So there's certainly an awareness amongst researchers that cost reductions need to be achieved. Whether they can be as significant as for PV, I don't know. But I mean, the other thing is, for solar PV, we always hear that the cost reductions for these large-scale deployment, which is achieved through auctions, but actually not all PV systems are that cheap. And I think, we need to realize that maybe in some cases renewable heat systems will be somewhat more expensive than fossil fuel alternatives, but that we then need to address through other policies like carbon pricing. We need to stop thinking of the atmosphere as a bin, a rubbish bin, effectively. I mean, we need to put a price on emissions to the atmosphere, and that gets around the problem of sometimes higher costs.
Great, thank you so much. And our final question today is for Hannah, and then we'll go into some closing remarks from our panelists. Hannah, the figure during your presentation showing that global renewable energy investment shows a sharp decrease from 2015 to 2016. What was the reason for that decrease?
Well, it was for a few reasons, actually. I mean, I have mentioned that there was there's been significant cost reductions in technologies. Also keep in mind that this figure shows investment in renewable power and fuels only. So it's not also including investment in heating and cooling technologies. But also importantly, there were some policy changes in some of the major markets, so China, US, Europe, and so that explains the decrease from 2015 to 2016. But the fact that there was a subsequent increase last year, again, is a good sign that developing and emerging countries are continuing to invest alongside developed countries, and all of this is happening despite the lower cost of renewables, particularly PV and wind. Renewable energy is just increasingly attractive and cost competitive in an increasing number of markets, and this is even without the policy support in some places.
Great, thank you so much to both of you and to Holger for the great question and answer discussion. Now I'd like to provide each of the panelists with an opportunity for any closing or additional remarks before we close the webinar today. Hannah, would you like to start with closing remarks for us?
Sure, and I'll start by saying thanks again to you, Katie, and to the Clean Energy Solutions Center, and again to Ute and Holger. Basically, I'll just reiterate what I've said before, that we're seeing that the renewable energy transition is possible based on these developments in the power sector, and this is really great news. But there's just got to be more effort put into the heating and cooling and transport sectors if we're going to meet the climate goals. Technologies are increasingly cost competitive, and we're seeing increased interest by a wider and wider variety of countries and jurisdictions. There will just be a more integrated and systems approach needed in policy and planning, along with creating a level playing field with carbon pricing policies and removing fossil fuel subsidies.
Thank you so much. Ute, would you like to have any closing remarks today?
Yes, thank you. And also thanks from me for inviting me, and thanks to REN21 for producing such an excellent report. I think it's a fantastic resource, and I would urge anyone listening to read it. And it's great that we can get more and more information. For heating and cooling specifically, it is very hard to find the data, and sometimes it's hard to see the progress from year to year. So just to reiterate that it is an area where we really need a long-term policy, because the turnover is slow of appliances. People often might link it to renovating homes, which doesn't happen very often. So it's a difficult area, but we need policymakers just to be aware that just addressing electricity is not enough. We need to think about other sectors. We need an energy system approach which links the deployment, say, of renewables and heating and cooling also with energy efficiency, which makes it all more complicated, but in the end we'll be better off with what comes out of it.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you again. And on behalf of the Clean Energy Solutions Center, I'd like to extend a thank you to all of our expert panelists today and to our attendees for participating in today's webinar. We very much appreciate your time and hope in return that there were some valuable insights you can take back to your ministries, departments, or organizations. We also invite you to inform your colleagues and those in your networks about Solutions Center resources and services, including no-cost policy support through our Ask an Expert service. I invite you to check the Solutions Center website if you'd like to view the slides and listen to the recording of today's presentation, as well as previously held webinars. Additionally, you'll find information on upcoming webinars and other training events. We are now posting webinar recordings to the Clean Energy Solutions Center YouTube channel. Please allow about 1 week for the audio recording to be posted. Finally, I'd like to kindly ask you to take a moment to complete the short survey that will appear when we conclude the webinar. Please enjoy the rest of your day and hope to see you again at future Clean Energy Solutions Center events. This concludes our webinar.